Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube, on Rumble, on X, or on my personal account on Facebook. All exaggeration aside, there is one thing we can all admit. We have entered a new world after the Russian offensive on Ukraine and the grand duel between the collective West, represented by NATO, vis-a-vis Russia. In this live conversation with George Szamuely, we discussed the visit of Putin to China, the Russian offensive in Kharkov, the assassination attempt against the Slovakian prime minister, and what is happening in Georgia and Armenia, my fatherland. George Szamuely, he is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute, co-host of the Gaggle, and author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. George, thank you so much for being with me today. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you very much, Kevork. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure. Guys, it goes without saying, all the relevant links of George's X account, his podcast, and also if you want to purchase his book, The Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. All the links are attached in the description below on YouTube. George, the Russian President Putin landed in China, and this is his first foreign visit after the re-election, heading a large delegation of diplomatic, military, and trade officials. What's your take on the importance of this visit and the timing of it just after the re-election?
Well, obviously, it is very important, and it parallels what happened with President Xi last year, who also, after his re-election as president, made Russia his first port of call. So it's a very it's interesting parallel. I mean, this is the partnership between Russia and China. It's obviously an important geopolitical event. However, one has to, temper one's excitement, because ultimately China is keeping its powder dry. I mean, although it has provided some assistance to Russia, had continued to do business with Russia, has bought energy from Russia, China has limited its support for Russia. It hasn't sent any arms, so far as we can tell. It has continued to sell dual-use technologies, technology that Russia can use for its military industry. If one were to sort of look at the sort of the geopolitical field, one wishes that China stepped up to the plate a little more. China actually exerted itself a little more in the world. It seems like China's happy to let Russia do all the heavy lifting, which is a little bit problematic, because ultimately Russia just can't do all the heavy lifting. But on issue after issue after issue, it's always Russia that seems to be doing the heavy lifting, and China is kind of vaguely supportive, vaguely keeping its distance. And one wishes that this so-called partnership without limits, actually, lived up to its name, and it had no limits.
It's very interesting that China is leading from the back, as we say, or leading from the behind. It's one of the benefactors of the Ukraine war in terms of the heavy work, in terms of the manpower, in terms of the pain on the economy, in terms of so many factors that Russia has been excluded from the SWIFT. China is definitely helping, but not enough, as you mentioned. However, when you see in the past what the American and British geopolitical theorists have warned of, they always spoke about that they have to avoid any sort of alliance between Russia and Germany, because it has a potential of ending the Anglo-Saxon supremacy over Europe. But they have strangely not given enough attention to the potential Russian-Chinese alliance, which seems to be changing the global order on different levels. There are other experts warned against the potential alliance between Russia and China in the recent times, and they always said, don't bring China, Russia, and Iran together. Those are the three pillars of Eurasia. Unfortunately for them, these countries are coming closer and closer, right? I mean, they see that this is partly due to their miscalculation, but they insist on the miscalculation from the collective West political establishment. How do you explain this situation when they see, it, like with your objective eyes, that this is leading into the diminishing of their supremacy over the world vis-a-vis the Russian-Chinese alliance?
Well, the problem is that the calculation on the part of the West is that Russia, as long as Russia, China, and Iran are not actually a part of any real formal alliance, they're the sort of axis of evil isn't quite the appropriate word, but they're somehow vaguely adversarial states with a adversarial stance towards the Western global hegemony. But as long as they don't formalize their partnership, then the West can get away with one breach of a red line after another. And what we've really seen really during the past getting on for now 2.5 years, is that the West has grown more and more arrogant and more convinced that they can get away with anything when it comes to Russia. So they've breached one red line after another. They've done all sorts of things in Ukraine that would have been inconceivable 2.5 years ago. I mean, one would never have thought that they would send weapons of such lethality into Ukraine, that they would sanction Ukraine to use Western provided missiles to hit targets inside Russia to kill Russians. And they've calculated that we won't suffer any repercussions. All of that would have been inconceivable. I mean, remember, back in the Cold War, you had one president after another who said, no, we don't get involved in Eastern Europe. That's just Eastern Europe. We don't promote the Hungarian uprising in '56. We don't promote the Czechoslovak uprising in '68, Poland in 1980. We don't do it because we don't want to antagonize the Soviet Union. Here, the Western powers have gone way beyond anything that was in the imagination of President Johnson or Nixon or so on. Why have they done this? Well, they are convinced that they are much stronger than Russia, and by implication, obviously, they think they're much stronger than Russia and China together, because they think China will stand apart, will not really join Russia, and they feel that Russia is more afraid of them than they are of Russia, and they've said it explicitly.
Yeah.
Russia is more afraid of us than we are of them. Therefore, Russia will not dare to escalate. They will not dare to do it, because if they escalate with us, if they start hitting targets inside any NATO country, then they're going to be involved in a war with NATO. And Russia is much more afraid of a war with NATO than we are of a war with Russia. And we've had the other day former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen saying that we can use the missile defense systems outside of Ukraine in order to hit Russian missiles in Ukraine. We can do it because Russia will not dare to respond onto NATO territory. This is the mentality of the reckless thinking that's going on in NATO land, and I think that's why they're ignoring this this growing partnership with, say, Russia and China, because as long as it's not formalized, and as long as China kind of wants to have a foot in both camps, then NATO just doesn't feel that it has anything too much to worry about.
Yeah. Where does this mentality come from? Is it a wishful thinking? Is it a miscalculation? Is it an ideology? Is it a combination of several factors? I mean, I see all the time statements from Western leaders that I myself get surprised. Like, who is advising them right? How do they come to these conclusions? How do they think that Russia is now fighting with, Ursula von der Leyen was saying, with the refrigerator parts or something like? How
Right.
do they come to these conclusions?
Well, I think it is Western arrogance, and the arrogance that stemmed from what they perceive to be their great victory in the Cold War. So, we know that Russia doesn't really think that it lost the Cold War. It basically said, well, we gave up. We didn't want to go on fighting the Cold War. But the West has said, no, 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 you lost the Cold War. You lost that
Hmm.
Cold War to us. We want the spoils of victory. The spoils of victory were obviously scooping up the states of the Warsaw Pact within NATO, scooping up a growing number of the former republics of the Soviet Union, scooping them up into NATO, and they want to continue to scoop them up. I mean, they're continuing to press Georgia. We're going to talk about that later, but they obviously desperately want to get Ukraine into NATO. There's the arrogance, which is that they say, we won this,
Hmm.
and you have to accept that you lost, and you have to behave towards us as the supplicant and as the subordinate who does as he's told because you lost. And Russia doesn't like this. Russia, obviously, who would like that tone being adopted towards them? But until Russia really hits back at NATO and makes NATO pay the appropriately high price, then this is going to continue. I mean, this isn't going to stop. They're going to continue to escalate in Ukraine. They're going to continue getting more and more involved in Ukraine. I think what Macron said about, well, maybe we're going to deploy French forces. I think it's going to happen. I think that's where
You think?
it's heading. It's not. This isn't just simply bluff. I mean, this
Hmm.
is where it's going to go. In the near future.
The job of the politician is always to be in touch with reality. I mean, I understand that these politicians might feel emboldened after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, after the Iraq war, after the Afghanistan war, after the Libya war. But this has started to shift, in my opinion. In Syria, it was a partial victory for the alliances against the West. And then the Russians waged the special military offensive in Ukraine. And we see objectively that there is a shift in, it's a gradual shift, but you can feel that increasing number of countries, governments, people are also emboldened, and they are daring to say no. I mean, I'm not old enough, but I still remember in 2003 when the Americans sent their forces to the Middle East, everybody's legs were shaking. But now in the Middle East, when America sends, I'm coming to bomb Yemen, the people are making fun. Like, it's not like America doesn't have the power, but the people of the region are also have capabilities, right? It always strikes me how the politicians in the West cannot read the changes, and they are stuck in the past. While they accuse their adversaries of being driven by ideologies, they are themselves hardcore ideologues, right?
You're right. Uh, but I would add a caveat to that, which is, I mean, let's say the case of Syria, the original goal, the goal that was articulated by President Obama, which is Assad must go, and this was repeated, ad nauseum: Assad must go, Assad must go. And while that goal has not been achieved, they have achieved other goals. I mean,
Hmm.
they've managed to maintain their destructive sanctions, which is just simply a punishment of the Syrian people for refusing to accept the American agenda. And Syria has lost parts of its territory, parts of its sovereign territory are no
Yes.
longer under the control of the Damascus government. So you can say, yes, they didn't achieve what they originally intended, but they achieved something wholly destructive, wholly negative. But it is a goal, and I think that's kind of the way America and NATO operate these days, which is, yes, they can't rule over the world, but they can achieve something through negativity, through
Yeah.
the destructiveness, preventing anyone else from establishing sovereignty, establishing some workable government, preventing other powers from emerging to challenge NATO. So it's a negative force, but that's not necessarily wholly ineffective.
This is exactly the point that you made. They can impose new realities and keep that reality. And for example, in Syria, they couldn't manage to win the regime change war, but at the same time, they disallowed the other side from achieving victory. And they have the military means, but also the financial means, for example, through the illegal sanctions, to keep Syria away from the SWIFT. Syria cannot pay, cannot make transactions, cannot reconstruct. Americans have even adopted laws that they go after third-party companies. Like they can go after companies in India and sanction the company if they do business with Syria. This is how far they can go. So because the Americans have a strong grip over the financial systems and over the SWIFT, over the dollar, they weaponized it. However, nowadays we hear, this is only the reports, that the Brics are not planning, but they already planned, and they will launch decentralized financial system to end the US dollar, and this could see birth in 2025, and this is going to be based on the blockchain. How much reliable this type of system and realistic do you think it is for the BRICS to issue such a decentralized financial system where governments can deal among each other, apolitical, they say, it's politics free, and it's going to be based 40% on the gold and 60% on the currencies of the BRICS plus?
Well, I think it's a very promising start, and it would be great if it would succeed, and it may do so. It's going to take a long time. I mean, as you described, the global financial system is so dominated by the United States, but also by the Europeans, that it's so much of the world will still want to deal with the dollar. And so it's going to be take a long time to challenge the dominance of the dollar. So obviously, it would be great if it got off the ground and started functioning, because this system, as we have at the moment, is obviously unsatisfactory. When the United States can come in, scoop in at any time, and seize any country's dollar-denominated assets, when it can prevent a country from earning a living by seizing its dollar earnings, then obviously this is not a system that can work. Now they tried other things like trading in national currencies, yes. But of course that doesn't really work very well, because if you get suddenly a huge surplus of rupees, well, what's the use of that? I mean, other than if you're going to make purchases in India, because no one else is going to accept rupees. So you need some kind of an international currency measure, and obviously that's what you need. You need something that's going to challenge the dominance of the dollar. So we'll have to see. Again, China's the one that has to come up and step up to the plate and make this a viable plan, because China is the one that has the economic and the financial muscle to make it happen. We'll see how much China is prepared to invest in this project.
Yeah. Guys, just a warning to you, there are some bots posting some comments. Oh my God, I just received 10,000 Bitcoin or Ethereum on Rumble. And and so just don't click on these links. When I finish with this live streaming, I will ban these bots, because they are just spams and they could send you into some dangerous links. So be careful of that. George, this week, the Russian forces waged limited but effective offensive on the front lines of Kharkov and managed to capture, I believe, 9 villages. What do you think the goal of this offensive now? Is it to ease the pressure on the Russian forces in the southern parts of the country, or they are determined to capture Kharkiv?
I don't think they're going to go for Kharkov. I think that's a huge undertaking. Kharkov is a huge city. It's a population of 1.8 million. It's very heavily fortified. I mean, it's been NATO has been fortifying it now for a long time. It may have been doable, but even then, it's hard to see whether it would have been doable back in February 2022. But now I think it's just not can't be done without a massive influx of Russian forces. The Russians really have to seriously mobilize and pour in millions of men if they're going to go for Kharkov. And I don't think Russia has any intention of doing so. I do think that it's more likely that it's a way of taking Ukrainian forces out of the Donbass, so extending their lines of combat and weakening Ukraine, because I think the goal all along has been, or at least all along since Russia changed its strategy sometime in mid-2022, I think it has to capture the Donbass. It's basically to drive Ukrainian forces out of the Donbass. Obviously, they want them to capture, Kherson, Zaporozhye, but I think that's the goal. I don't think Kharkov itself is on the agenda. They would probably like to create a demilitarized zone. Russia has talked about creating a demilitarized zone, so maybe there is some plan that should fighting come to an end, with some form of a de facto armistice. I don't think there's going to be any negotiations. I don't think there's going to be a peace treaty or anything like that. But if it does come to an end, I think that Russia would probably like to have some kind of a demilitarized zone in the Kharkov region to provide them, to provide security for the Donbass and the other territories that will be incorporated within the Russian Federation.
So, taking from what you said, you're saying that the strategy of the Russian forces at the moment is a war of attrition to exhaust and drain the Ukrainian manpower.
I think so.
Yeah, the way they are waging this conflict now, it seems that they are betting on the time, and they see that time is not in the interest. But you mentioned the plans of deploying NATO forces in Ukraine.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's why what they're thinking, what I suspect the Russians are thinking, is they will take the territories of the Donbass, territories of Kherson and Zaporozhye, but no more than that. Because I think that, NATO is going to deploy its forces. If they go beyond that, if they go beyond the Donbass and head westward, then there is a danger of provoking a direct war with NATO. I think that's it. If you just go by what Macron was saying as to the conditions and to when French forces would be deployed in Ukraine, it seems like he thought that if Russia goes beyond the territories that it holds now, or the territories that it wants to incorporate, which are this, the Donbass and Kherson, Zaporozhye, if they want to go beyond that, that will trigger the NATO direct intervention. And I think, given that, I think Russia doesn't want that. I think Russia doesn't want to get into any kind of a war with NATO. I think that's the plan. I think the plan is we'll take these territories, which we now claim as part of the Russian Federation, which seek a demilitarized zone around Kharkov, and avoid any direct shooting war with NATO. I don't know if that's going to work, because who knows? It's hard to predict the erratic nature of NATO decision making. But that's where it seems to me the conflict is heading. If they try to take Kharkov, that again could, first of all, it would be a very, very bloody and messy operation. And there is a danger that it could trigger a direct NATO involvement.
What about after Kherson? Do you think they will try to capture Mykolaiv and Odessa, or this is out of the equation? One of our commentators also asked, "What about Odessa?"
I have to say, I think that is train has left the station. I think Odessa was doable, certainly was doable in 2014, wasn't taken in 2014. Russia was committed to Minsk. I think Odessa was probably doable in 2022. Again, it's now very heavily fortified. I mean, they've been putting in their defenses at Odessa. Again, it would be a massive military operation for Russia to take Odessa. It could be done, but then Russia would have to change its approach. I think then Russia would have to seriously mobilize, would have to really increase the commitment, its manpower commitment, its armaments commitment, because that would be a massive operation to take Odessa.
Yeah, man. I think also Odessa for NATO, if I was in NATO and I'm in decision making, I would set that for my red line, because if the Russians capture Odessa, then Ukraine loses its geopolitical importance. Black Sea.
Absolutely. That's why it is. I think it's absolutely a red line for NATO, because without that, that's it. Ukraine is landlocked. And then the Black Sea, gradually is going to become a Russian lake, or at least the northern part of the Black Sea will be a Russian lake.
I think in terms of what the pragmatic decision would be, I don't think that the Russians would go to Odessa now. I totally agree with you. Even even Turkey is against it. Who is standing in the middle? Historically, all the wars that have been fought over the Black Sea, nobody have forgotten about that. In Europe, we see a big decline in the quality and the competence of the politicians. In my opinion, there are two politicians that, when you listen to them, when it comes to Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Slovakian prime minister and the Hungarian leader, right? And the Slovakian prime minister has been targeted into an assassination attempt yesterday. He's still alive. We don't know his full medical condition yet. But I've been following the reports about him. The German Der Spiegel, for example, they published an article blaming the prime minister of creating a poisonous environment in his country, which led into this assassination attempt. I watched a reportage by the Sky News, basically blaming the victim and calling him that he has put his country on the path to authoritarianism. The same thing they do with Viktor Orban, right? Why do the globalists hate such leaders? I'm speaking about the character, the nature of such leaders when they are more sovereign and they are driven by the national interests of their people.
Well, that's a very good question. It's precisely because they put ahead of everything else the interests of their own people, which you're not supposed to do. I mean, of course, about Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, who famously said, I don't really care what the German voters think. I'm only interested in Ukraine. And that's really how the European leaders and, of course, American leaders are supposed to think. So when Macron declares it is completely unacceptable for Russia to win, we cannot accept it. We cannot live with Russia winning. And of course, the British say the same thing. He never really says, well, what do the French people think? Do the French people think that this is such an important issue for them, whether Russia wins or doesn't win? What do they care? I mean, they're nowhere near Ukraine. It's got nothing to do with them. So that's the whole point. You have to make these various ideological goals far more important than the interests of your own people. So Fico and Orban just simply say, well, no, I was elected by my people. I have to serve them. I have to do what's good for them. Yes. And Orban says, well, I need energy. I need energy for my people. I'm going to go sign a gas deal with Moscow because we want gas. We don't plan to be cold in the winter. And that's not really how you're supposed to think. And now, Fico is, of course, a very interesting character because he has gone further than Orban. Orban takes a very pragmatic view. He's just simply saying, well, all I care about is what's in the interest of Hungary. I'm not interested in this war. I think this war needs to come to an end. We need peace now. It's serving no one's purpose to continue. But Fico went beyond that. He said this war was caused by Ukraine. He actually says this. Ukraine caused this war. because Ukrainian Nazis murdered Russians in Odessa. So
Yes.
he's actually says things that are really anathema to the leaders of NATO. Heaven forbid that anyone should address the causes of this conflict, to go back into recent history as to what was actually going on, as opposed to, oh, Russia made it's an unprovoked attack. So Fisco has been a real thorn in the side of the globalists, because there's also he has talked about COVID. He intends to conduct a thorough investigation of the criminals who had imposed all sorts of restrictions on Slovak citizens, who had rammed these injections on the Slovak people. And he has said, no way the Slovakia is going to join the WHO pandemic treaty. So he has been really going against one kind of globalist shibboleth after another, and you can see why so many of these Western leaders really hate him. I mean, now of course they're doing the shedding crocodile tears and condemning it, blah 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 blah. But when you mentioned Der Spiegel, and of course much of the Western media coverage, they're kind of suggesting, well, he brought this on himself. That's he got what was coming to him. So they talk, oh, well, he, very divisive. Politics in Slovakia, very divisive. And he's the one who caused the divisiveness. He's the one who has polarized opinion in Slovakia. And this person, the alleged assailant, he's obviously this was a political assassination.
Yes.
He may well be mentally unstable. He's obviously mentally unstable, but he was politically motivated. This is a political operator. He, was very agitated about the stances that Fisco was taking. I mean, he was taking part in pro-Ukraine demonstrations. He also made pro-Ukraine Facebook postings. So this was a political hit. This was somebody who was influenced by the kind of global media campaign against Fisco. So it's a bit embarrassing for the Western media, because they essentially find that it's somebody who's under their influence who has committed this act of violence. So they kind of, hemming and hawing. Oh yeah, he's a lone wolf. That's okay. He's a lone wolf. He's a crackpot. But so they'll focus instead to talk about Fisco. Now imagine, and you know this better than I, imagine if it was a green politician in Germany and there'd been an assassination attempt, not even against Annalena Baerbock, but some other, fairly prominent green politician. The media would have been going absolutely crazy. This is the alternative for Deutschland, the hard right, the extreme right, the ultra right, they're behind this. They're a threat to democracy. They're resorting to violence. And in no time at all, there would be demands that it's simply that all these right-wing parties, particularly the AfD, were outlawed. So very, very different response to what they have to what's going on now.
Exactly. Not only the different response, it's like blaming him for getting almost killed.
Yes, it's all his
crazy.
He polarized. He's a
he polarized. He poisoned the political environment in his country. So it's crazy. One of our commentators asked about Hungary's position on Palestine, like they have taken a very good position on Ukraine, and why, when it came to Palestine, they haven't voted for the establishment of a Palestinian state.
It's a very good question, and I don't know fully the answer to that question. Orban has been very philo-Semitic, and the Hungarian government has gone out of its way to say that Hungary is a kind of the home of the Jews in Europe. There's no part of Europe in which Jews are more cosseted and have a happier life than they do in Hungary. Hungary has been very, very friendly with Benjamin Netanyahu. They have a kind of a tacit alliance against George Soros. They're always, whenever they meet and talk, they're both condemning George Soros.
I mean, it would
It's
be in the interest of Hungary for a Palestinian state to be established to keep the Palestinian refugees in Palestine instead of
right.
importing them
Yeah.
in their countries, right? It's like,
It's a, but there's another aspect of it, which is this current kind of whatever one calls it, vaguely nationalist movements in Europe. They've all been co-opted by Israel, by the Israel lobby. So this guy, you probably know him, this Hazoni, who runs this one of these. He runs a number of different
Mhm.
operations in Israel, but he's the sponsor of these various kind of nationalist movements. You know, they have these
Yes.
conferences, the nationalist conferences, but it's essentially this is part of an Israeli managed effort, and a lot of kind of figures on the right in Europe, are part of this. I mean, Orban is a part of this. Nigel Farage is a part of this. Suella Braverman, they all come to this. So yeah, nationalism. Yeah, we're down for nationalism. I'm for nationalism. I'm nationalism. But all this is coming from Israel, and they say Israel is the paradigm of a nation state. So you want a nation state. You want a Europe of nation states. Well, look at Israel. Israel is the model, the exemplar of a nation state. It's totally false. It's totally
Yeah.
fraudulent. But this guy Hazoni was a very smart guy, but he has put this idea forward. Well, you have to support us because if you're a nationalist, then we're on the same page. We're nationalists. But of course, anyone who was genuinely a nationalist would say, well, okay, I mean, I might support Israel as a nation state. I also support Palestinian nationalism. I mean, I'm not making any distinctions. I support one nationalism. I support another nationalism. But it's very interesting. They never recognize anyone else's nationalism. Israel, the nation state. But no one else apparently in the Middle East has a right to that.
I recently watched a statement for Pierre Poilievre, who might replace the
Yeah,
prime minister in Canada.
yeah,
And
terrible person.
oh my God, Ron DeSantis, it's like these two personalities as well. It's like the way they speak about Israel, it's so disgusting for me.
It's quite disgusting because he's not even Jewish, and he
Yes.
just adopts this whole language. I mean, what the hell is that? I mean, it's just
Mm,
disgusting. I mean, somebody who just talks in this way and not even
yeah,
thinking about, well, somebody else is paying a price for this. But
no, they don't
apparently,
care.
only these people have rights that need to be respected. Other
Yeah.
people just don't have any rights. They're just insects.
Yeah, and those are the ones who call themselves Christian
Yeah,
conservatives,
right.
whereas Israel actively brutalizing against the
Yeah,
Christians in the West
exactly.
Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in so many other places. Unlike
Right.
what the media says, the Christians are not living as free people
Right.
under Israeli occupation.
Yeah.
Um, George, if we move a little bit to the east, we have Georgia left and Armenia left.
Yeah.
Georgia, big protests. And what is this bill about? If you can explain to the people, is it a Russian inspired bill? Is it a national bill? What is it about? I saw the tweet of the president of Georgia, and she spoke to President Zelensky, and she appreciated the phone call and the support of Zelensky. It looks like this is between the globalists, the EU people, and those who are trying to limit the funding of these NGOs in Georgia.
Well, first thing to remember, this woman who is the president of Georgia, she isn't even a Georgian. I mean, she is a French woman. She was born in France, grew up in France, was educated in France. She was a career French diplomat. But spent years and years in the French diplomatic service, and
Mm.
then at the end of her career in the French diplomatic service, she was parachuted in to Georgia, given a kind of overnight citizenship, and became president. So I don't even know whether she speaks Georgian, but so she's she's the president. Now it is a largely ceremonial position, but she has opposed this government plan. Now, this foreign agent bill is actually modeled on the American foreign agent bill, which is that if you are funded, any organization, that is involved in politics. So that's in any way, whether it's a civil organization or whatever. But if you're essentially seeking to influence public opinion, and you're getting funded from abroad, you have to register as a foreign agent.
Yes.
That was the United States passed this bill in the late 1930s. Obviously, they were concerned about the influence of Germans inside the United States. Now, Russia has adopted a similar law. Hungary has adopted, many countries have adopted similar laws. And, you have to then wonder, well, why exactly are the Americans so agitated about this legislation? Because all you have to do, you just register as a foreign agent. You don't suffer any consequence. You register as a foreign agent. You're not going to be outlawed. But it's, in the spirit of transparency, people should know whether an organization that seeks to influence public opinion is getting funded from abroad. I mean, it's very basic.
Wouldn't this bill also be adopted on any NGO that is funded by Russia? It's the same thing, right?
Exactly. It's funded by Russia, funded by China, Iran, whatever. Whoever. You're getting money from abroad. Now, this, what it's saying is actually only if you get 20% or more of your funding from abroad, you have to register as a foreign agent, which incidentally is more generous than the United States. The United States bill doesn't specify a number. I mean, it pretty much says, well, if you're under the influence of somebody from abroad, and it doesn't have to be a government. It doesn't say, oh, it has to be a foreign government. No, whenever any foreigner, that have a foreign principal who has a substantial investment in some organization that seeks to influence public opinion, then you have to register as a foreign agent. And it's common sense, that it's in the name of democracy. It's supposed to be about transparency. You should have that kind of information. Now, the Americans in particular, they're the driving force here. The Europeans are kind of limping along behind, but the Americans have been important. Well, why are they so agitated about this? Well, because, they obviously don't care two hoots about Georgia any more than they really give a damn about Ukrainians. Georgia and Ukraine are vital pieces of real estate. They want to use them as battering rams against Russia. And so Georgia, a very small country, very, very small country, about 4 million population, is absolutely inundated with NGOs. The number of NGOs in Georgia is just stunning. It's a staggering number, because that's how they intend to take over Georgia, through these NGOs. It's, the kind of the color revolution. They already tried it once, and they want to do that again, and therefore that's why all these organizations are getting funded from the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, National Endowment for Democracy, just go on. There's an alphabet soup of acronyms of these organizations. They're funding these NGOs. And that's why the Americans are very upset about this. And so they had this guy, Robert, I think O'Brien, I'm not sure if it's Robert O'Brien or whatever, he's the Assistant Secretary of State. He was there in Georgia 2 days ago, warning Georgians, if you go down this path, with this legislation, not only are you have to kiss your NATO, EU aspirations goodbye, but we're going to start hitting you hard. We're going to start sanctioning you, sanctioning your families, and we're going to make life very, very difficult. It's like a gangster who comes along and says, you don't play ball with us. Nice store you've got here. Be ashamed if something happened to it.
Sounds very democratic and very like they're respecting the aspiration of the Georgian people who voted for this government in the parliament.
That's right. This was the democratically elected representatives of Georgians who voted in favor of this bill. But the Americans said, no, we are with the people of Georgia, the people demonstrating outside. So suddenly the people, the mob outside, the violent mob outside, they're the representatives of the people of Georgia. That's our commitment to democracy.
Another country that has more NGOs than the total population of the country is probably Armenia.
Yes.
We have 3.3 million Armenians, and then you have unlimited number of NGOs. And recently, I've been not like investigating, just out of curiosity. I read for the people who are pro-Pashinyan a lot and very anti-Russian. And I go to their, like, all of them have very fancy websites. You go to their websites, to their partners. And when you tell them, like, you're funded by the State Department, and they say, how dare you? I'm not funded by the State Department. I'm funded by, I work for this think tank. But this think tank has a partnership with this organization, and this organization with that organization, and that organization's funding is from the Pentagon or from the, it's like, it's just a complete circle of clown show, like, you're not directly receiving your money from the Pentagon or from the CIA or from the State Department, but you are receiving through intermediaries into your pockets.
They're always, there's always a cutouts, and they're all woven, intertangled, like the George Soros organizations. They go this organization, the Open Society Institute, and then this organization. So you get lost in all these different organizations, but the money is all coming from the same source. There are all sorts of middlemen, but it's coming from the same source.
Yeah, Pashinyan was in Europe, and he was asked by the journalist, if you had an opportunity to have a dream, for what year would you want Armenia to become a member of the EU? Pashinyan responded, what year? He said, this year.
I have to say, though, Pashinyan completely baffles me. It's like, yes, I understand the whole NATO. I want to be a kind of a complete satellite, a creature of NATO and the EU. But Armenia is in such a vulnerable position. It's got Turkey here, it's got Azerbaijan there. It's a tiny country. It already, Russia, which is basically, it's been a protector for centuries, it doesn't even have a border with Russia. Yet it's going out of its way, and has gone out of its way, to antagonize Russia ever since Pashinyan first came to power. It seems just strange how a country can have a leader that's leading it into complete catastrophe, because that's with this conflict with Azerbaijan, this is really going to end very, very badly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this will not only end up in a big catastrophe, it could lead into the downfall of the Armenian nation, because Azerbaijan can walk over Armenia, and the Armenian government thinks that they can protect themselves with their very superpower called democracy. Maybe they're going to throw some democracies on Azerbaijan when they attack Armenia proper, and which is happening. Azerbaijan is occupying now many villages inside Armenia. We're not speaking about the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. It's in Armenia itself.
And Azerbaijan wants to create the land bridge between the two parts that are separated by Armenia, and he's going to do it, because I don't know who's going to stop this.
Pashinyan wants it. Pashinyan wants it. Pashinyan wants to give it to the Azeris, wants to give it to the Turks. He believes in economic integration with his neighborhood. And this could be, of course, possible after solving the geopolitical problems with your neighborhoods. You have the Armenian genocide case, you had the Nagorno-Karabakh. Those things could be solved through negotiation from a position of strength, but not when you have capitulated 2 times. And if the Azeris say, I'm going to invade Yerevan now, Pashinyan could just sign another capitulation treaty, unfortunately. And this hurts me to the core, because Armenia is my fatherland. And I truly believe anyone with good intentions in Armenia could do better. And I truly believe that Armenia needs to have very good relations with everyone, has to have good relations with Russia, with the European Union. No problem for having good relations, but don't become a pawn. Don't become a pawn for the EU, and don't become a pawn for Russia. Just keep the balance of the relations, right? And this is something, when it misses, it turns into a catastrophe.
George, could I ask you just one question about Armenia?
Of course.
What is the role of Iran in this? Because it seems like the only country that could step in for Armenia is Iran, because Iran cannot be very happy with Azerbaijan just building this land bridge across Armenia, and particularly with us, given the relationship between Azerbaijan and Turkey. So Iran could find itself really surrounded by sort of adversary countries. So could Iran be, Armenia's lifeline?
Actually, Iranians see this as a very big threat, the corridor project, for two reasons. One, because they see the Turkic countries in Turkey and Azerbaijan wanting to have a geographical continuity between Ankara all the way to the Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, all the way to the Crimea, by the way. They have this, they speak about it theoretically, and they preach this in for example, in the book of Davut Oglu, and they believe that Turkey has to become the Commonwealth of the Islamic world, and mostly the Turkic countries. Iran is a Persian country, and they know that the strengthening of these pan-Turkic sentiments and geopolitical strength, military strength, will definitely reflect negatively on Iran, its position in the Middle East, plus the inhabitants in Iran. In the north, you have millions of Azeris living in Iran. This could also encourage separatist movements inside Iran itself. The second thing is Iran knows that Azerbaijan is an advanced satellite state for Israel, and the Israelis spy on Iran from Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
Therefore, for them, giving an access for the Azeris, this free access, and cutting all the borders between them and Armenia, which historically has never been cut. Armenia and the Persians and the Armenians were fighting and living for centuries. But at the end of the day, they were neighbors, and they're going to completely change this historical reality as well. So will the Iranians intervene? They said they will. Iranians said that they will intervene, and they have established a new consulate in southern Armenia in the Sunni region, which is an indication that they are not going to allow it. But if the Azeris do it, will the Iranians go into war? This is a very big question. Armenians aren't ready to fight. Rest assured that the Armenians, under the current leadership, they're not ready to fight, and therefore we have a new movement now in Armenia, headed by an Armenian priest, and who is leading the way in the capital now. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think he was from Nagorno-Karabakh, and he was displaced, and then he went to Tavush, and now Pashinyan wants to give up a big town, a part of a town called Tavush, Armenian town in the northern part of Armenia, to Azerbaijan, and the people they're fed up. So they walked from Tavush all the way to Yerevan, and they're blocking the ways. Pashinyan has a strong grip over the security, state apparatuses, and the Americans have trained the police now. In the past 2 years, they have been training the police on how to crack down on protesters. Americans haven't given any weapons to the Armenians, but they trained them on how to crack down on the protests. The Armenian police is brutalizing the demonstrations in the streets, and there is no coverage of it, right?
No.
There is no coverage of it. It's a very unfortunate situation. It's becoming increasingly dictatorship in Armenia. And rest assured that I get worried. I'm Syrian, ethnic Armenian. I get worried more when I go to Armenia and land in the Armenian airport than if I land in Turkey, for example. I've been criticizing Turkey and calling them all the names against Erdogan. But when I land in the airport in Turkey, I'm not afraid. But when I go to Yerevan, I do fear, because Pashinyan's government, they have a list of names of the influencers, of the journalists who criticize him, and they put you on a blacklist. But how they do it, very sneaky. They don't tell you don't come to Armenia, and they don't reject your visa application. In the contrary, they give you the visa, they allow you to come to Armenia and pay the tickets, and you land in the airport, and they capture you, they put you into interrogation for many, many hours, and then they send you back to your wherever you came from.
Well, at least they send you out. They don't keep you in prison forever. So at least you get to leave the country.
I mean, they don't have the right, because I don't have an Armenian passport, so they cannot treat me as like a criminal or somebody who is inciting against him. You're just a persona non grata for them. They put you back in the plane, and they send you back. And those people are all Armenians. Like, this is your fatherland, and you cannot go to your fatherland because you criticize the prime minister. It's so crazy.
Yeah. No,
George,
it's just it's terrible the way. I mean, France has also got itself very much involved in this, and again, the Armenians don't seem to realize that the people who are pushing, people who are sponsoring you, they don't care about you. They are only using you for their geopolitical goal. They couldn't care less if Armenians were just simply wiped off the face of the earth, as long as for a while you serve the geopolitical agenda of the Americans and the French. I mean, it's just amazing that it's so obvious, and it's just tragic that Armenia's leaders don't realize this.
Yeah, and the size of the American embassy in Yerevan tells you everything you need to know about the role of the American embassy. It's like a big compound in the middle of Armenia. One of the commentators says Lavrov is Armenian, right? Yes, his father is Armenian from Georgia. His surname was, I think, Kalenderian or something, and then he changed it during the Soviet Union into more Russian name. George, this was an amazing chat with you. I really enjoyed this insightful conversation with you. For the people to follow you, you have the X account and the podcast.
You can follow me on X. You can follow me on Substack. Above all, please join us on the Gaggle, on the locals. We're on YouTube, so you can go find us easily on YouTube. There's always, we're posting fresh content every day, so please join us.
Guys, we are around 800 people watching this, so you between different platforms. So I would really appreciate it if you follow also the Gaggle. And many people already came here and they say they already follow your work. So that's really great to bring to connect them between these two podcasts. And guys, tomorrow I'm going to come again and do another live streaming at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. We see what topic are we going to discuss. So make sure that to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you like to support Syriana Analysis, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. I know that today I received a comment from a friend telling me that please increase the tier of the support, like make it also 10 or 20 or 30 euro per month. I'm not here to make money. I'm not here to be rich. I'm just giving you also the opportunity to support independent journalists like myself. We're not receiving money from the State Department, from the CIA. Uncle Putin is not paying. Uncle Xi Jinping is not paying. And Bashar is not paying, definitely, for sure. So thanks to you, we can continue doing such content. So I would really appreciate that, guys. So we see you tomorrow. Peace be upon you, families. Salam.